Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm very glad to be joined by Carla again. And this time, we're going to discuss and introduce her new course on the Egyptian mind, cosmos, myth, and meaning. So we ran into each other a few months ago via Substack, and then we had a few chats. And now we're going to actually offer a course on Egypt, a subject I've always been fascinated with, the origin, the cradle, of course, highly influential on Plato and on Aristotle. And so Carla put together a very intriguing course, which she's going to introduce to all of us tonight or today, depending where you are. And we're also very happy to take questions. So if you have any questions for Carla on either on the course or on the well, it's just technical details on the course, etc., just let us know in the chat and we'll get to you at the end, towards the end. So Carla is going to present. Well, first of all, Carla, introduce yourself, perhaps. What's your Werdegang? What's your curriculum vitae? What do you do now? Very intriguing also. She's an international woman of mystery. And
Thank you. Thank you for the great introduction. Hello, everybody. So my name is Carla Berenice Groh, and I'm a trained archaeologist, and I trained in Freiburg in Germany. And I did classics and Near Eastern archaeology, and then I added on Egyptology, which I studied at the University of Basel in Switzerland. And I graduated in all three disciplines, which was quite challenging because in Egyptology you are required to do Middle Egyptian, New Egyptian, the different sort of language evolutions of ancient Egypt, and then you also, of course, have to do Latin and ancient Greek. So it gives you a great overview of the ancient world, and I always focused on intercultural relationships within these different cultures. So I worked pretty early on the cultural relationships between, for instance, the Assyrians in ancient Egypt, but also Greece and ancient Egypt. And then I also for 4 years, I did PhD research with a research project on heroes in antiquity, or heroes in general, and heroism and the cultural implications of heroic narratives. And I took that to Greek Egypt, or Ptolemaic Egypt, and I looked at their narratives during that time and how they constructed heroism as an answer to basically being taken over by the Greeks, but also how they constructed their cultural identity after basically losing it after the Greek conquest. And that led me deeper into the material that I write about now on Substack, which is basically this introducing ancient Egypt to the wider public in their own language and through their own texts and through their own writing. Because as I discovered in my research, that's a very different culture that you encounter when you actually start reading their literature and delving ever deeper into their own writing. And this is also what inspired my course, where I offer a unique access point to ancient Egypt, where we explore the culture from within and not from without. So what usually happens with ancient Egypt, and we're not even aware of it, is that we look at the culture through our own lens with our own projections and at a surface level. So we look at the iconography, we look at the monuments, but hardly ever do we delve deep enough to really understand the underlying cultural logic, and that renders everything in a very bizarre light, and it almost turns it into a bit of a joke, and it makes it look like a very superstitious and slightly primitive culture. Why that is a field of research on its own. The whole reception of ancient Egypt is a very interesting but also slightly problematic field. How we encountered this culture over thousands of years, why we were not able to read their language is an interesting, I'd say, an interesting tale of anthropological self-reflection, because how everybody encountered ancient Egypt says a lot about their own culture and their own civilization. And I have a little bit of a example for us later in the shape of the mummy, where we can actually examine how this happens and what the course can actually do once you learn how to read these symbols of the culture properly. And what I also do, Johannes told me to also talk about this, is I now also work in as an art dealer, and I also have a art foundation, a nonprofit here in the US that has the mission to make culture and education accessible to everyone. And that's something that's very close to my heart and something I really believe in. And yeah, so that's about me and my work in a nutshell.
Thank you very
And
much. Excellent. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, if you want, I can also talk a little bit more about the course, or maybe.
Yes, that would be good. So, so if anyone has any questions for Carla, let us know in the chat. We'll get to you in the end. Just tell us a bit about the course, and then also give us the brief lecture. That's just feel free to.
So,
start.
Yes, about the course, as I already mentioned, is what it does is it, like I said, it gives you access and it allows an approach that is unique in that the material that we will be looking at is material that you will never see outside of academia, and even within academia very rarely, because it's very specialized material. And then we will also take a course that, or we will take a path inside the culture that works from the language to the mind or the myth, through, and then further the cosmology and the mortuary literature, and it ends with ma'at and meaning. And this has this progression is basically the way how everything sort of builds on top of each other. So they considered, for instance, language and the hieroglyphic writing system as their most prized cultural technology, and it was the way how they demanded you interact with their culture. They said the first thing you should do is you should learn the language, or at least learn to understand what our writing system is, and then you should start studying our texts. And in the first lesson, we will look at the underlying mechanics of the language, but also the cultural logic of the language. If you really go into how they constructed words, how hieroglyphs worked as a writing system, and the inherent plurality of the writing system. So for instance, one hieroglyph can have three meanings at once. It can have four different functions at once. It can be a symbol. It can be a simple biliteral sign, and it can be also a so-called determinative, which is a sign that gives you a deeper semantic insight into what is being said. So for instance, if you have the word greedy, you can write the word greedy with the letters, and then you can add, and some scribes did that, you can add a little crocodile, which is only a determinative in this case, so it's not read out loud, to modify the meaning of the word greedy. So you can say it's greedy in a way that is not very, let's say, choosy, like a crocodile. So this shows you two things. They loved to play with this ambiguity of the system, where you could add little signs and add meaning that was not necessarily said out loud and was only hidden in the script. So this is also a very foundational and important thing to know about their language, is that a lot of what we read in the text gets lost in translation. And the Egyptians famously did not like the fact that their religious texts and their metaphysical texts were translated into Greek, for instance. And they said, this is just not possible, because so much of the meaning gets lost in translation, because so much of the meaning is inscribed in the hieroglyphic script itself, which shows us that the hieroglyphic script was in and of itself a technology and a metaphysical system that had a lot of their cultural logic inscribed in it in a sort of semantic web. So this is what we will look at first, and it will give us deeper insights in how they functioned. Also, you will see that they had a great sense of humor, something that drove the Romans mad about the Egyptians. They always would have their little puns, and they always had their little sort of hidden word plays and meanings. And they would, for instance, write, there's a famous text that they wrote exclusively with crocodiles, just to dumbfound other strangers that would come to the temple, because you would have to understand all the different connotations of the crocodile to sort of crack that code. So they also loved to have fun with their language. They loved their language and their writing system. It was something that they were incredibly proud of, but they also considered something that that was a true expression of their culture. That to express yourself through beautiful words, as they called it, was the highest, it was the epitome of being cultured. So it is a core principle to understand about them. So that's where we start. And it's a great reminder also, because as you see in the first lesson, everything builds upon the language. It's all inscribed in there. So all the basic principles that you need to know about the culture, they all show up in one way or another in the language and in the writing system. So in the second lesson, we will then go into the mind of Egypt. And by that, we, and with we, I mean Egyptology in general, we mean a certain way of thinking. So you cannot understand ancient Egyptian culture without understanding their myth and what Egyptologists like Assmann or Hornung called mythological or mythic thinking, also fluid logic. So what they did was they inscribed their entire worldview, cosmology, metaphysics into for instance, a myth like the myth of Osiris. And what is often done, and this shows us why we cannot read this culture literally, is that the myth of Osiris was then famously turned into a story by the Greeks, but it was never meant to be a story. So we will learn how they mapped their entire worldview through myth and through this sort of interrelational logic that is inscribed in myth. And I give you one example for the Osiris myth. We have in there the notion of Osiris as the primeval first king of Egypt being vulnerable and being murdered by his brother Set. And this is a symbol for their entire worldview, where they saw the cosmos as something vulnerable, something that was not secure in its creation and was constantly threatened by chaos. And this mirrored their whole world around them, because the Nile was in the middle of a desert. And if the Nile did not bring fertilizing silt and earth, they would be completely wiped out and their civilization would end. So this was something very real to them. And therefore, Osiris is associated with the Nile flood, with fertility, with agriculture, but also with kingship and with the victory of order, what civilization is, over chaos, what is symbolized by Set. And there is much more to unpack here. You could basically teach an entire course only on the Osiris myth. And in the third lesson, we will then go into the cosmology, and we will see that cosmology is, again, deeply connected to the Osiris myth, because it is rather complex, because they had a worldview that was based on the principle of a vulnerable, uncertain universe that was constantly being reborn. So it was a cosmogenic universe, or cosmogenic cosmos, that had not only to be constantly renewed, it also had to ritualistically ordered. So this was not something that was once created as we see it, or Abrahamic cultures would see it, and then there is an instance in the past and we move away from it in a linear way. They also viewed time differently. Again, all of this is inscribed already in the language and also in the Osiris myth. They had different spheres of time and different spheres of existence. And Osiris is a very good example, because he dwells in the so-called underworld. And the underworld can be imagined as a transitional realm between our reality and the afterlife. And this is a place that we have to traverse after we die. Every soul had to traverse it in order to reach the other side, the eternal life, but also in order to be transformed and to return to this part of reality, or this sphere of existence, but in a different form, in a form of a spirit, as they called it, an effective spirit. All of this is also inscribed in the Osiris myth, but where everything here ties together is that they not only believe that the cosmos had to be renewed every day, which is why the sun and the symbolism of the sun bark had to pass through the so-called underworld, through this transitional dimension, and be reborn every morning. They also believe that you as a human could, in your dying, partake in this journey through this liminal realm of Osiris. And that's what basically enabled your transformation to emerge on the other side in this eternal sphere of being, which they considered to be the jet eternity, where time was suspended. It was no longer linear, there was no longer progression, and time was suspended. And in the cosmology lesson, we will also see that there was, of course, a lot of discourse in ancient Egypt. That's why it's so important to read their literature. There was no unity on how the universe was created. There was only unity about the underlying mechanics of the principle that I just described. There was unity over one thing, which is there was a primordial chaos, the noon, and then there is this mechanism of constant cosmogony and constant renewal. How this whole process happened is about as widely discussed as today's quantum physics and gravity and a creator God. So there was not really unison over this, but they later on tried in the New Kingdom to all tie it together in the so-called Theban cosmology, where all of these different principles were tied under one unifying theory. And we will look at those different literary texts. Again, very rarely are they discussed in popular culture. And in the fourth course, then we will go deeper into the mechanism that I just described, on how to transform your soul, how to pass through these liminal realms of the underworld to emerge on the other side, and how this transformation took place. And we will look at the pyramid texts and at the Book of the Dead. And we will apply this mythic thinking. This is why it's so important in lesson 2 to learn the way of thinking of the ancient Egyptians. We will apply that to that literature and see that there is a fascinating way of looking at death as a very specific transformation and also a specific return. So you're able to return to this side of existence as an ach, or so-called effective spirit. And there is a very specific book of spells, the Book of the Dead, on how to achieve that. Again, all tied into the Osiris myth. And then in the last lesson, we sort of bring it all together in the lesson about Ma'at and purpose, where we look at the greater picture of what tied this entire universe together, this entire cosmos together, and that was the principle of Ma'at. So this act of first creation, this cosmogenic act that constantly happened, was believed to occur within a certain cosmic order, and that was Ma'at. So the most important principle was that everything had to be connected to this first act of creation and to this higher order or cosmic principle of Ma'at, and that governed everything. So from the king, whose only real task was to uphold this order and to uphold Ma'at, to the everyday person, which when they passed through the afterlife had to show that they lived within the moral principle of Ma'at. That was the weighing of the heart. And so it reached from the lowest to the highest, speaking in political terms, and it bound everything together. And it was also the place where they imagined meaning being inherent in everything that they did in this interconnectedness and interrelatedness. And then in the end, we will do the bonus lesson, and I call it a bonus lesson because it allows us to take a step back and look at the psychology and the psyche of the ancient Egyptians, because when we look at their literature, and specifically their crisis literature, we can learn how they felt about all of this, what they sort of, how they constructed all of this. If they had anxieties, we will learn that they had anxieties, what will happen after death. We will also learn that what I just described, this fear of the universe, the cosmos being vulnerable, was very real to them. And they felt that when there was no king, their entire world would collapse, not because they had such an affinity for hierarchy. It was because they really believed that if there was no king to uphold the universe would collapse. So these are great examples to illustrate how important it is to really understand that logic, the cultural logic from within, and then also look how they actually felt about it and wrote about it, because a lot of this literature is a very personal accounts of people witnessing time of decay. For instance, they call it the apocalyptic literature. Then there are philosophical treatises. There's literature where a man talks with his own soul, and he's very depressed, and he says, I'd rather be dead. And the soul answers, no, you don't want to be dead. You want to be alive. And that also shows us that they really valued life. They were not a culture that had a death cult at all. They just saw death differently, but they still valued life very highly. So this is what the bonus lesson allows us to do, to look at the system again from a personal angle. So this is the entire lecture in a nutshell. And I think we also had a question in the chat.
Yeah, we had a question in the chat. One question I have is, or just if you could clarify, will people walk away from this course being able to read, maybe not the entire Rosetta Stone, but some hieroglyphs, if ever they travel to Luxor, etc.?
Yes, you basically will be able to read some hieroglyphs right away. So there's some recurring ones, like the hieroglyphs for beautiful, or the little scarab, the Heper hieroglyph, which spells manifestations, also meaning, becoming. And so I deliberately chose to show hieroglyphs in the beginning that we will encounter again and again and again, and also words that I showcase in the first lesson that we will encounter over and over. So the goal is that you get enough of an insight, because there's also a crash course for the entire grammar, and of course not everything, but to give you enough of an idea how it works, how the language was constructed, that you could technically use a dictionary. There's also a link to a free resource dictionary. So technically you could take a small inscription, because in the end we will be translating an entire obelisk, and you would be able to translate that obelisk on your own by what you learn. And that, yeah, so it gives you enough of a foundation to move along and self-learn, but also hack your way through the challenge of deciphering these signs, because as you can see in the course, there is a lot of these signs, and the greatest challenge is basically to learn their phonetic values, so to learn how to turn them into sound. And that is a challenge also for an Egyptologist, because there's so many of them, and if you don't know what they sounded like, it's hard to look them up in a dictionary, and that's one of the biggest challenges. But if you're willing to do the repetitions and to go through some of the signs and look at the Gardner list, and all of that is in the course, what you need to do. If you put in the effort, yes, you would be able to do your own little translations.
Excellent, very good. Thank you. I'll pull up the question from Subhan. I have a general question. How do archaeologists decode a language like Egyptian hieroglyphs? Do they have any initial knowledge from direct or indirect sources, or they start from zero knowledge?
So in the case of hieroglyphs, they were lucky enough to find the Rosetta Stone, and that was what enabled the final decipherment. Before that, it was just a very unfinished theory. They knew that some of the hieroglyphs were sounds and some of the hieroglyphs were symbols, but they could not really put it together, because what they could not understand until they had the Rosetta Stone is how they functioned as a system. And what brought them to the final breakthrough is that they realized, but some Arab scholars had already realized that, is that the ancient Egyptian is close to modern Coptic that is still spoken, which is an ancient language that is still spoken, which was a mixture between Greek and ancient Egyptian. And and I described this step by step exactly how they deciphered it in the course. So that's there's a exact path how they did it through the cartouche of Ramses, actually, where they realized that the sun, the symbol of the sun, Ra, and then the little bundle of animal skins, Mes, and then the S in the end, this is what basically brought them through to the breakthrough, Champollion, that Ra, the sun, it could be both a symbol and a phonetic sign. So you say Ra, and then the bundle of skins in the middle, he realized from the Coptic word mise, to be born, that this was a triliteral sign, M-E-S, and then, no, biliteral, sorry, M-S. And then the last one was just a simple letter. And this is what brought him the breakthrough. Oh, this is a mixed system. So you have symbol, you have phonetic signs, and you just have normal letters. And then he finally got it. So I'll detail all of that in the course.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll take a look at the course page now, and Carla, interrupt me anytime. And if you'd like to add something. So maybe just the technical details and dates, etc. If you'd like to join the live cohort, the seminars, which will be 2 hours long every Sunday, beginning August 16th at 12 p.m. Eastern time. If you're in the US, that's 6 p.m. Central European time. That should be 5 p.m. UK time. It's 2 hours. Carla leads the seminars. So you come in, you've listened to the lecture that's pre-recorded, that's on the inside. I'll show you a lecture in a second. And once you've listened, you come in, you take the seminar for 2 hours. There will be some breakout sessions. That means you get to meet some of the others. We'll run a Discord server on the side for additional discussion during the in between the seminars, and so you can ask questions, you can present your own thoughts, you can present your own theories, etc., and then we have enough time to discuss them. Those sessions are recorded for participants, so that means if you miss out on any of the sessions, it's not an issue. You just listen to the session the next day or during the week, and so you don't miss out on anything. And everyone who signs up gets what the marketing people call lifetime access, or indefinite access, to be a bit more philosophical. So you can always come back to the course and do it again. I'll show you maybe what it looks like on the inside in a second. So if you head over to the enrollment page, it details when the course will take place, actually right here. So there's a full schedule and curriculum here, detailing everything that you just heard also from Carla. And you find here the key takeaways and 3 different tiers to choose from, which I'll discuss or introduce in a second. But I'd like to show you what it looks like on the inside. Before we do that, if there's anything you'd like to add, Carla, please just
maybe I'll take another question from Mickey
Roberts. Yes, 1 second.
He's asking us,
I have to hide this page and then pull up the question. So I'll read the question for everyone. Is this a practical application of the Egyptian wisdom on our souls or experience of the death without trying to practice Egyptian religion as a lab? Is there a way to incorporate this into practice?
I'm an internet dinosaur, so somebody has to tell me what LARP is.
LARP is live action role playing.
Oh, okay. When you say this, does it probably means the course?
Yes, I suppose it's the immediacy of the internet. So this, I suppose, he means the course.
We do in the 3rd lesson, we'd go very deep into the metaphysics of ancient Egyptian soul construction, or how they imagined the soul and the transformation of the soul after death and what happens to it. And in the last session, we go, I think, into the application of all of this, yes, and how we can turn this into meaning, and how we can practice is too much of a religious word, I would say. I would rather call what the ancient Egyptians had was not really a religion. It was more of an entire system, because they did not differentiate between religion, what we would call magic, politics, science, philosophy. It was all one system. So it's almost like asking, can you practice this philosophy? It's more of an internal process to committing to seeing the world like this. And it's an interesting, it definitely changed my view of a lot of things, my view on life, my view on death, and also different levels and spheres of existence. So I do believe there are ways to apply it to everyday life, yes, but not as a religion or as a spiritual system, more as an overall worldview.
So you won't be walking around like during the Egyptian afterwards, but
no. But I got a few things to say about that, how this entered the cultural bloodstream that we the one thing that we really do not understand about ancient Egypt is why this sort of extremely stylized and canonized iconography, that is something that is a typical ailment. No, I would say a source of ridicule, because people feel like, why couldn't they paint naturalistically? And I explain that in the course as well, why there is a need for this never changing iconography that is highly symbolic, because we know from graffiti that they were able to paint beautifully and naturalistically, but they chose not to. They chose to show people in these strange canonized way that looks to us a little bit ridiculous, but there is a full metaphysical reason behind it, which is rooted in their principle of a constant, of a cosmogenic universe that constantly renewed itself, but also had to be permanently kept the same. So the permanence principle was deeply rooted in their cosmology. So things were not supposed to change, because that would mean to deviate from the original or the first creation source that I described before. So that's why things always had to stay the same over thousands of years.
Which then Nietzsche and Hegel take as rigidity, as rigidness.
Yes, which is very funny to accuse, of all cultures, to accuse the ancient Egyptian one of rigidity is actually hilarious, because that was what Egyptologists and a lot of I would say neighboring disciplines, that the biggest problem with the ancient Egyptians was always that they could not be categorized. They could never ever be nailed down to one rigid answer. So you would go to a conference, and then people from neighboring disciplines would always go, so what are the kings? Are they a god or are they a human? And you would always answer, and then the other Egyptologists start laughing and say, yeah, exactly. There is no clear answer, because yes and no. And it's the same with all of their signs. Is their language, is it a symbolic system, or is it a system of letters, or is it a phonetic system? Yes and no. It's all of it and not. And the same with their religion. And that's why Erich Hornung, the famous Swiss Egyptologist, he wrote the book on ancient Egyptian religion, calling it the one and the many, dealing with exactly that problem, that for the longest time, there was even people in Egyptology, I mean, that was 100 years ago, they called the Egyptian culture a little bit stupid and unable to reason. So they said they didn't have Vernunft, they didn't have reason, because there was no rigidity. They could not settle down on one god. They were always intertwined, and then the gods would merge with each other. And the underlying principle was that of the source that I mentioned in the beginning, that would create everything, and everything was interrelated. So to them, it wasn't important. So rigidity was not important. Categorization was not important, because it was all an expression of the plentitudes that could then that all originated in the one. That's why the one and the many principle was very important to understanding ancient Egypt, and also what Hanum called fluid logic, to never try and pin it down too much, because that's not how they thought. They always thought in interrelations. They always thought in a greater whole, and never in small categories. I once explained it with a civilization living on an ice shelf, and one civilization is always busy in categorizing all the different forms the ice takes. So that's all they do. And there is another civilization that only talks about that we all come from water, that everything's made of water and we are water, and all they are interested in is what is underneath the ice shelf, and they don't care about the different forms on the ice shelf. And that's basically the logic where the ancient Egyptians come from. They always are, their logic always comes from, it's all water anyway. And our logic and modernity comes from, we have to talk about what it all means, that we're on the ice and that all these different forms and shapes emerged.
Yeah, and then it opens an infinite regress into nothingness. So just on the notion of LARPing, not everything is a LARP just because you read something. Live action role playing is of something very specific. It means you put on a costume and just you pretend play almost as an adult. But when you read something, let's say you read Dostoevsky, which is also, if you're honest, a foreign world and a foreign time to us, in translation, be that English, German, French, whatever, it's very difficult to pick, and it's going to mean something different. It's 19th century Russia. Not Russian, it's difficult to translate, etc. But still, it'll change if you take reading, studying, etc. seriously. It'll change something of your outlook upon the world, always. And so you could describe that maybe for a second, and also maybe talk a little bit more about the one and the many, because that, of course, that is very philosophical. That's something we find. Hen kaipan. Hen kaipan is the Greek. Hen kaipan is what Hölderlin writes into Hegel's journal in Tübingen, when Schelling, Hegel, and Hölderlin are roommates in the Stift, students of theology. And this is what inspires so much of German idealism, is to try and think through the one and the many. Eins und alles. Goethe as well. Eins und alles is one of his most famous poems. So it's fascinating to hear that this is something that started with the Egyptians.
Yeah, I think it was really it was Erich Hanum that finally made that jump of stopping to try in a rigid way to categorize ancient Egyptian culture and their religion, and to look at it from that philosophical standpoint. And that's what was the key to understanding them, because he called it a fluid logic. That's what permeates everything in their thinking, from their myth to their mortuary literature to their religion, is this one and the many principles, not only in a way that, like I said before, that this was necessarily a religious worldview or a spiritual worldview. It was simply an underlying logic that they applied, where they, like I said, they would always argue from the standpoint of water and say, this is what we all go back to. So that's why they also saw our existence as something that was only in part on this sphere of existence, on the sphere of matter. So what they would say as the many is the different manifestations that they, again, inscribed in the little scarab. That's why I put it right in the first lesson, because that's what's so important to understand. To them, it was all just different manifestations. That's what they call the plentitude in the concept of ma'at as well. So we remember everything they thought existed would go back to what they called the Zep Tepi, the first age, the first occurrence. That's the one thing they could all agree on, even if the later cosmologies that came out of it, whether it was the sun god that created it, but this underlying mechanic they could all agree on. There was a chaos, and then there was a first occurrence, and out of that emerged a cosmogenic universe, a cosmogenic, ever to be renewed universe. And everything that went through that process had to go through a system of ma'at. And this was sort of a divine and cosmic order. But then what came out of this creation was just one of the plentitudes. So every single one of us, is one of these plentitudes. And our becoming in this sphere of existence, our unfolding in the sign of the scarab, is one of the many manifestations. And the purpose of all of this was to bring these manifestations to their fruition in the divine, within the divine order. So not to deviate, not to act against this divine order by, in one of the texts we have, by becoming a follower of Set, a follower of chaos. And they also believe, for instance, that murder would deeply upset this underlying fabric, because they also believe that from this first occurrence, from the Septepi, emerged an all-binding fabric. That's the vulnerability, because this fabric could be, it could be hurt, it could be thinned, and it could be destroyed. And that was their greatest fear, that the outlying waters of chaos could sort of come back in and destroy the entirety of existence. So that's why this underlying mechanism is so important, because that was to them something that was ever imminent.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So if there are more questions, let us know, because we're leaving soon. I'm just going to go over the technical details of the course now. So you head over to the website, which is linked to in the description of this video, but also linked to in the live chat. And once you're, yes, I agree. Dine Keskost, whatever that is. I can't really read it now. Very interesting. It's very interesting. I can't read it now. It is very intriguing indeed. And you can hear that this is going to be an absolutely fascinating course. If you click on the enrollment page, I always say to people, if you have time, so this is 6 live seminars. If you have time for about 2 to 3, take the inner sanctum, the live cohort. You click on this little button and then you click on enroll now. And that takes you, I'm going to show you this now. It takes you to the enrollment page. You type in, if you're already signed up with Halcyon, it's very easy. You just click on buy now. There's different ways of paying for this. There's Klarna and all these different things as well. So you can use that. If you really don't have time for the live cohort, at least I'd say 2.5 sessions. Take the first tier asynchronous study, which is self-study. That means you get access to not 5, that's wrong. It's 6 videos. I think that should be corrected now. Yes, now it's 6 videos. So 6 full lectures. I'll show you the first lecture in a second, so you get an idea of what it's like, but you've already heard Carla speak now, so you know that this what it's going to be like. And if you'd like to take private tutorials with Carla, you should take the Ma'at Seeker tier, the private tutorials, which is right here. So you would click as well on enroll now, takes you to the enrollment page, and all we ask now is, that you sign up and use different forms of payment for the honorarium, which allow us to offer these wonderful courses by such magnificent people as Carla online, which you may never have been able to take this a course that goes into that depth on ancient Egypt. And now you are, because there's us and there's the internet. So you find a full schedule and course curriculum here if you're interested. You just know, so seminars, that is also basically the lectures. The lectures is what the lectures address. And if you take the seminars, what the seminars will be like, what people say, we've done this now for 6 years. What our students always say is, this is what university should have been like, but wasn't. Why? Because you're not worried about getting a good grade or anything. No, you just come because you want to study. And there will be 20, 25 people in the group who are there for the very same reason. Only there to learn, to study, and to be surrounded by people who also have the very same interest as you. So if you are, let's say interested in Egyptian cosmology, you have to take this course anyway. But if you are, a reader of ancient Greek philosophy, there's so many paths. I'll publish a few videos in the coming weeks on what Plato has to say about ancient Egypt, Aristotle had to say about them, Hegel. I've done a few by Nietzsche already. Yes, he has a very specific idea of what Egypt is. I tend to disagree with him now that I've heard Carla lecture so much. You should also check out her Substack, by the way. Of course, I'm an attendant in the live seminars as often I can make it. It did not often work out for me because we're in different time zones, but I listened to the recordings afterwards and I've learned a lot. I went to Luxor 3 years ago. There's a video of me when I'm in Luxor, actually, at the hotel after visiting that natural pyramid, the graves in the mountains. It's incredible. And so if you'd like to listen to that. So now finally I found my personal Egyptologist to teach me, basically, and maybe also teach you. So take the course. I'll show you the course now, Carly. You may interrupt me anytime, you know this, right? Okay, so once you're signed up, which I'm sure all of you are doing right now, this is what you're going to see. So you see here a brief summary of who Carla is right here, so you know who your teacher is. There's a brief welcome video, which is loading now. We won't have to worry about this. This is the handout for the first lecture. So that's a whopping 17 pages, isn't it?
No, it's 40 pages.
40.
It's 40 pages. That's the entire crash course and everything.
So,
the hidden
okay,
meaning.
that in itself,
and you
my
will
friends,
be able to read the obelisk in the end. So that's actually an entire course in itself.
I was going to say this. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's a 6-week course just to get through that.
So once you're in, you can print this off and start, reading hieroglyphs and decipher them. So what we do is we're splitting these lectures up. I'm going to mute you here. So you get access to these. So you've got the handout, you print off the handout, and then you can
you need to print out the handout because it's a lot. And so you need to follow along because it's a lot of hieroglyphs. But it goes from the mystery of the hieroglyphs, the deciphering of the hieroglyphs, and it goes straight into the hidden meaning. So if you don't want to do the crash course in hieroglyphs, that comes at the end. You don't have to do it. That's optional. You don't have to go through the whole grammar and the structural logic.
Yeah. So it's there for you. And the thing is, once you're signed up, you can always come back to it. You go through the course over the 6 weeks. If in 2 years, for some reason, you go to Egypt, you come back to the course, you listen to it again, etc. You download the app and you can listen to it. You can download it to the app, etc. So there's a video file, there's the audio file, and that's just the first part. So there's the second part, third part.
Also, we translate an entire obelisk. So if you find yourself in front of that obelisk, you have that handout and you can impress people by reading that full inscription.
There you go. There's your summer cocktail small talk.
There's also an obelisk in Rome. There's one in New York. There's one in London. 2 in London. So I mean, you actually
Paris. The British stole a lot. So yeah, they've got plenty of those.
It was
but they have the Rosetta Stone. Well, it was gifts. Okay, good. I mean, The
No,
Greeks.
honestly, the one in New York was a gift. I think
Well, New
from
York,
Paris
maybe. I don't know about
was a gift. The British one, I think they saved it from from ruin. I would have to. Oh no!
here.
The British one is the is a sister piece to the one in New York. I think that was a gift as well. You got to
Okay,
be
we let them
fair.
off the hook this time. But just for that, the Greeks might disagree, but not on the on any obelisk, but on other things. Again, marbles, for example. So here's Ananke herself, necessity herself. So we've come to the highest, at least for the Greeks, asking, will the self-study tier, which is the first one, include written material? Well, you just saw 40 pages of written material, so
Yeah,
yes.
you
But that's
have a
just
lot.
yeah.
You have a
So
lot.
the
Also the bonus lesson will have almost an entire ebook with literary texts explaining also the cosmology. So a lot of the larger literary texts that we'll touch upon in other lessons will then also be available in that it's called Cattle of God and that e-reader. So there is a lot of written resources. Yes.
So I'll show you this again, people. This is just the first handout. I thought it was 17 for some reason. It's
I wish.
37 pages. Yeah, I thought maybe I stopped at 17 because I can't count any further.
Yeah.
So once you're signed up, which I'm sure you're doing, everyone, right now, that's what you see. This is what you see. You see the welcome video by Carla. W's and V's, very difficult for Germans, by the way, in English. And once you are in, because we pronounce them exactly the other way around than you do.
Yeah.
So once you're in, you see this 40-page document. This is just the first lesson. You click on download. So you can download it, print it off, or whatever you do with it, put it on your iPad, etc. So yes, there will be plenty of written materials on top of lectures and audio files of the lectures. What you should do as well is what I tell all my students is that you get a journal specifically for the course to take handwritten notes. Doesn't have to be as tacky as this one, could just be a very normal one. But that's what I would recommend you do, be it as a self-study student or in the whether you're in the seminars or whether you take the private tutorials with charming Carla. So that should answer that question by Ananke herself. We have a few more. Should we answer them?
Sure.
Okay. Herbert McBurglerferk did the internet is incredible. I never had a persona on the internet, but I always admire when people do that. Did ancient Egypt also show a historical shift toward greater abstraction and a move away from the body? I'm thinking of the contrast between Homeric religion, life centered more on the body, with the soul as a fading remnant, and Orphism, the body as a tomb to escape. Is there a similar trajectory in Egyptian thought?
The short answer is no, because but I will tell you why. The reason, the long answer is the reason for this is there are historical shifts, of course, over thousands of years. There are a lot of shifts also in how they applied certain aspects of their system. But the mummy and the body was always seen as something that could, of course, sort of fall apart upon death, but it was seen as an anchor in this part of reality. So that's why the mummy was so important and had to be preserved. Also, Osiris was believed to be the first mummy, which allowed you to stay in this sort of liminal sphere of existence. So your soul could not only transform and then become part of the afterlife and transcend, it could also then come back and be reunited with the mummy and go forth by day. That's the actual title of the Book of the Dead. The original title was To Go Forth by Day. So that's why physicality was always something important in terms of being an anchor in this physical realm. And abstraction was something from the sources of what I see is something that they did not really understand, again, because for them, abstraction was not necessary because they did not think from the top of the ice shelf, from the manifestations into an abstract realm, they thought the other way around. So their entire thinking, that's how they would answer, was already based in a fluid, abstract, mythic, interconnected realm. And then everything that was actually matter and everything that emerged from that, to them, was almost what we might call abstract, because it was just something that was temporarily ephemeral and maybe not really important. So that's why their thinking was the other way around. So they would not move towards the abstract. What happened is, and that's the historical shift, is that later on, I would say in the New Kingdom, there was a lot more discourse. So you see in the literature that they started asking questions. So they would ask, for instance, and we will look at that in a cosmology lesson, why are we here? Why are the gods not here? Why is there suffering? If there is mad, if everything comes from a perfect source, why do we suffer? And how does this whole system work? So there was philosophical discourse, and this got more and more later on. And then in after the conquest and in the first millennium AD, when they got constantly conquered, there is a shift towards a more individualistic religion, where they themselves believed to become more godlike. So that's, I would say, was the main shift to a more personalized and individualized spirituality.
Great. So here's Kevin, who's already enrolled, by the way, in the seminars, attaining a blank steel to carve my notes upon. That is proper.
That's
That's what we need. So thanks, Kevin. Here is pessimistic idealist. Schopenhauer speaks of Plato as being taught by Egyptian priests, and these priests in turn by Indian mystics. How accurate is such an account of the relation? I'm skeptical about the latter.
I just wrote an article in Substack on initiation and who claimed to be initiated, and the claim that Plato was initiated into the Egyptian mystery cult or whatever, that is a claim he never made himself. That was later. So I think Diodorus wrote that. So it's very unclear if he even ever traveled to Egypt. That is something that we only have from later sources. It was said that he did after the death of Socrates, but that is conjecture, so we don't know. And he never claimed that himself. However, there is other Greeks who claimed, like Pythagoras, to have traveled to Egypt. Solon, after his great reforms of Athens, claimed to have traveled to Egypt and to have been initiated into their secret wisdom or into their sacred knowledge. And there's also Herodotus, who famously went there and talked to priests. It was pretty frustrated about a lot of things, including that they didn't really have any histories written down. But anyway, so there is cultural contact and there is the claim. But for Plato, we cannot really say historically accurate, whether or not he was. And then with the Indian mystics, that's all I can say is that we know they had trade relations very early on, like as early as 3,500 BC with Pakistan to get lapis lazuli. So there were relations. There is no mention, as far as I know, of any direct contact, but it could be argued based on the origins of their writing system that there might have been a connection with the Indus Valley civilization, but that is all I know.
Great, thank you so much. Herbert McBurgle-Flurkin asks one final question, and after this question, Herbert, you must enroll. Did Atenism, you'll know what this is, Carla. I don't know what this is.
I think it's probably from
Atenism survive in any subtle way after its suppression, texts, ideas, traditions, and could it have influenced later Platonic ideas of emanation from the one? That's Neoplatonic. Sorry, careful. You have to distinguish between Plato and Plotinus, by the way. Herbert McBurgle.
What I can say is he is probably referring to Aton and the monotheistic religion that Akhenaten tried to install. This was completely rejected by the Egyptians because it was against everything they believed in. It was against their cosmic order. It was against Ma'at. It was against their entire cosmology. We remember that had to be renewed. And this, but there is still also in the literature, also in academia, there is still this theory that this constituted the origins of monotheism. And then it was argued that it sort of lived on in that regard, but that is now being. I don't think that is regarded as the leading theory right now. So,
Excellent.
not in
Very
ancient
good.
Egypt, but maybe in some shape or form later on. Yeah.
So here's what we'll do, people. We're closing this now, and I'll just show you again. Once you sign up, you'll be taken to the first lecture, which is all uploaded. So what we're going to do, we're going to drip out the content over the next couple of weeks, and also over the length of the course. So once you're in, there's a welcome video, and there's the first 37, at least 37, almost 40-page handout. That's just the first lecture. It's going to give you a full overview, I would say, into an introduction of how to read hieroglyphs, etc. That's to download. So you see the lectures look like this. You listen to Carla before you join in the seminars, or if you do this asynchronously, you just listen to lectures in your own time. You can always leave a comment here. Hello, my question is blah, blah, blah. But there will also be a dedicated Discord server, which at least for the first cohort will be active. So the first sort of 6, 7, 8 weeks, there will be a dedicated Discord server where you get to discuss this amongst your peers. We won't be very active in it, but this is for you to discuss. But if you leave a comment here in time, we'll get to respond. Yeah. But if you have time, for at very least, let's say, 3 out of the 6 live seminars, you should join the Inner Sanctum live cohort. And if you use the coupon, so Herbert McBurgle-Flurkin just promised that he will enroll. Perfect. Very good questions also. So that's so the dynamic in the seminars will be like this. It's very, very active. It's incredible what happens. So we're going through the Odyssey right now, which is Saturday afternoons my time. And officially it's 2 hours. Yesterday, it was 3.5 hours. So sometimes we'll go over a little bit, but it's just that it's so much fun to do this. The teaching is so different from what I remember teaching at. I'm not going to name the universities now, but let's just say different British universities. I don't want to get sued. Oh yeah, they might. You know they will. So the first 5 of you will get 20% off with the coupon code PYRAMID. You know, pyramids, very Egyptian. Of the Inner Sanctum, that's a live cohort. We already have several people enrolled, so it's time to, because it's strictly limited to 25. So you click on this, very easy, and you click enroll now. And that takes you to that enrollment page, yeah? To whatever you do here. So you sign up, and once you're in, you get access already to the first full lecture.
And don't
so
forget
today you can start.
Put in the coupon code, pyramid.
Oh, well, yeah. If you're so inclined, yes, you could. You don't have to. No, you should. It's called Pyramid again. But if you'd like to take 3 private tutorials in addition to the recorded lectures and the seminars, so private tutorials with Carla, which will be 60 minutes each, also over Zoom, over the course of the 6 weeks.
Which also,
then you should take the mods.
Tutorial is maybe too narrow. You can basically come to me with any question. Also, like, tell me beforehand, and I can specifically research.
Yeah, we should rename this. I don't know what I call it, dialogue or something.
Because this is also what some people on Substack like to do. You know, on the paid subscriber tier, is to the specific question format where you say, hey, this is something I've been struggling with, or something I was always interested in. Can we talk about this, or can we go deeper on this one subject?
Yeah. Or maybe you're working on something related,
But yes, it also happens
broadly
exactly.
speaking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe you're working on something and you say, "Hey, look, I need an Egyptologist to look over this because
Which happens all the time, of course.
I'm meandering around in a Nietzschean way, and I need somebody from the other side
Yeah.
to look if this is accurate."
So that would be, those would be private, off the record. We should call them dialogues rather than tutorials. So, sometimes, so now it's dialogues. Sometimes, my too many years inside academia, they still catch up with me. So take these. There's only 3 of them available, and all you have to do is. So, by the way, the enrollment page shows you everything you'd like to know. Key takeaways of the course, when everything will happen, the full schedule. So it's always Sundays, begins August 16th, right here. August 16th, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're in the US, that should be 9 a.m. PST. At 6 p.m. Central European Time, 5 p.m. UK time. So if you're in America, it's a leisurely morning or just after brunch, let's say. If you're in the UK, you'd have to, maybe you just come back from the pub, from a Sunday roast. So and there should be no or soccer any long. I don't know when soccer is, but on Europe, 2 p.m. Eastern Time every Sunday for 6 weeks. We begin on August the 16th and we move all the way to September 20th. You find all details on the enrollment page here that's already been uploaded in full. More questions and you're seeing this afterwards, leave a comment. If I can respond, I will. If it's something very specific, I'll just forward it to Carla. Maybe she has time to respond to it. But if you're very interested and very keen to join and ask your questions, then do so now. Carla, anything in closing, something that we didn't mention, something you'd like to impart on people before we leave?
Maybe the one thing is that that didn't really come through is that we will talk in the last lesson specifically about the application of all these ideas and what it means for every one of us. So there will be an entire lesson dedicated to human purpose, deeper meaning, and what we can extract from this entire metaphysical system about life, death, and what it all means. And at least to me, what I learned from that culture has been life altering in a very positive way. It is a beautiful way of approaching wisdom, approaching how we think about life, how we think about interconnectedness, and that's something that I wanted to stress once more, because I feel like in the whole, like, talking about the Book of the Dead and talking about the cosmology, and sometimes it gets a little bit lost that also we will dedicate an entire lesson to what it all means to us and to everyday life.
Yeah, that's usually this is why I left academic philosophy, is because it doesn't change. There are some academics who are like this. There are some who lead a philosophical life. I would say most don't. And you walk away, you read a text, you learn something. It should change your life. You must change your life, as Rilke said. And usually when you are exposed to something you haven't heard of yet, it has this sort of effect on you. And this is what our courses are built for. So not LARPing, but transformation. Yeah.
Truly.
Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Thank you so much, Carla, for your time and for putting together this magnificent course that we're all looking forward to learning from. I look forward to learning from it myself, and I already listened to the first lecture. I haven't read all 37 pages yet, I have to admit, but I shall do that soon. And we'll try and impress some people by reading hieroglyphs myself. Thank you so much. Anything else, Carla, before we leave?
That's it.
Perfect.
Thank you.